All right, let's get restarted. So this section of the lab, I'm going to go over JavaScript, and I'm going to try to condense as much information as possible, just to give you like an overview of JavaScript. And you're going to be practicing a lot of these ideas during this course. We won't have more opportunities to discuss specifically JavaScript, but we're going to discuss many of these features in the context of graphics. So obviously, from now on, we're going to be interested in how to render stuff on on the browser, but we're going to use JavaScript for that. So every now and then, we're going to kind of visit these ideas again, and we can always discuss as needed. So JavaScript is an interpreted language that provides dynamic interactivity on the web pages. And this is a key aspect because so far our pages are made out of tags that are static, right? We can change the style of the tags, but if I want to, for example, look at the right hand side animation here, you see this hey message. Imagine if you want, for example, whenever you click on the image, you want to see this message, hey, or for example, imagine if you want to do this animation where every second you toggle on and off this message for the user. Or this is just a silly example, or a dummy example, but any type of interactivity or any dynamic behavior can be added using JavaScript. And specifically, we're going to use JavaScript for drawing on a tag called canvas. But the syntax of JavaScript is similar to C. So if you're familiar to Java or even Python or C++ or any C-like language, you'll see that the syntax is pretty much the same. You're going to be able to guess. If you don't know how to write something, you can just guess based on C or Java, and you'll see that the syntax is very similar. And JavaScript is a multi-paradigm language. You can write applications using event-driven paradigms or functional paradigms, and also imperative paradigms, including object-oriented. So it's a very diverse and language. It can, and this is both a pro and a con. Because of this flexibility, you can write different stuff and it's very nice, but at the same time, things can get kind of messy very easily. If you're not very careful, you can start writing messy applications and kind of get lost on your own code. So especially when the code on the project grows a lot. So you'll have your own experience. Hopefully, it's going to be a good experience. I really like JavaScript, and I think it's very easy way to get things going. So this is an example of JavaScript code that I wrote. It has many things in it. A lot of them are like comments that are just for guiding the code, like guiding the reading of the code. But basically here we have some variable declarations. We are accessing the DOM in the second line, and I'm creating an event listener. So I want to talk about these concepts because they are major concepts in JavaScript. As I said, it's a lot of times in JavaScript you're going to program stuff based on events. So for example, you're going to call a function when a user clicks on something, or you're going to call a function when a message arrives. So these are events that you don't know when they're going to arrive, right? You don't know exactly at what point in time these things are going to come, but you have to be ready to respond to them whenever they come. So for that, we create we use these event listeners, and many different tags already have some events that you can handle. For example, click events. Those are very common events that any tag can respond to. So for example, if I click on an image, right, I want to do something, and I can just add this event to the image. And let me show you how to do that now. So, but before doing that, I want to create our first JavaScript file. So in our project, and this time I'm going to create a file here. So in our project, I'm going to create a new folder, and because I like this structure as well, for I normally in my web pages I have a folder called JS for all my JavaScript files. Feel free to have it anywhere you want, but I like this organization. So I'm going to make new file. I'm going to call this, let's call this main.js. Okay. Now we have an empty JavaScript file. And I want to start this with a function. And to write a function in JavaScript, you use the keyword function. I'm going to call this function main. This function will have no arguments. So, and you open and close the body of the function with curly brackets, similar to C or JavaScript. The function keyword is not there in C or Java, but here, yeah, this is how you write a function. And you could have here, for example, arguments. Let's say argument 1 and argument 2, right? Or it could be indefinite. You could have as many arguments as you want. This is going to be a function without any arguments. I'm going to save this, and I'll go back on my web page. And the body tag has an attribute, a special attribute that is called onload. And the value of this argument, of this attribute, is a JavaScript code that is called, that you want to call whenever the page is fully loaded. So basically what I'm going to write here, I'm going to write main. So what I'm saying is that whenever body is loaded, I want to run this function main here. Okay. You don't need to do this to write your JavaScript files, but I think this is a good way of starting with JavaScript, because by doing that, you know that the entry point of your program is here. As I said, JavaScript can do many different paradigms. But because you're trying to, now what I'm trying to do here is follow more like an imperative type of programming that most of you are probably used to, which is, for example, the C language, right? In the C language, you have one line after the other, and these line are statements that are executed in order. And there is a main function that is the starting point of that code. The same for Java, you have this class, and the same for Python. But in JavaScript, that's not necessarily true. You don't need actually an entry point that is well defined like this, but I'm forcing it so you get a very imperative-like structure here. So main, we get main function, and here I'm going to type my first JavaScript command, which is the console.log hello world. Oops. Hello world, or let's do hello CSC 160. This command, what it does is, first of all, there's a couple of things here. Console is an object. Dot, when you type dot, you're accessing either attributes or functions in objects. And then log is a function of the, so log is a function or a method of the object console. And the argument of this function is the string hello world, hello CSC 160. So let me run this code now. I'm going to run it like this. So we don't see any difference because we are writing to the console. So let me bring up the console. It's saying main is not defined. So this error here is a JavaScript error. So let's see why. I know why. We wrote this file, but nowhere here we loaded the file, right? We didn't say like load the file. So we have to say that. We have to, in our head, we can say script, and then you can say source equals to JS / main.js. Okay. Now I'm gonna actually add a comment here just to show that HTML also has comments. So a comment is kind of this complicated syntax here, but this is a comment in JavaScript, in the HTML, sorry. So here I'm gonna say load style, and then here I'm gonna say load scripts. Now I hope that we get the print in the console. Wait, interesting. Did I forget something? Oh, my bad. I forgot to close the, see, like I forgot to close this. Yeah, there you go. So I forgot to close the tag. Here we get now the print to the console. Hello CSC 160. Something that I didn't mention is that this is an interactive console, similar to Python. When you open Python on your terminal, you can actually type stuff here. For example, I can type console.log. Hello world. And then I get the result. So you can play with JavaScript in the console anytime you want. Okay. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to add an event to this image. So when you click on it, you get something. Okay. But for that, I want to introduce an even more key concept, which is if you want to, for example, click on an image, we have an image here, right? But we don't have the question is, how do we refer to this image in our JavaScript, right? We need some sort of ID or identifier to access this image from the HTML. Because we imagine, for example, we could have 3 different images here with the same source. The same source, for example, we could have the 3 images like this. What if I want, how do I access only the image in the middle, right? Or I could, for example, if I want, I could add an event to all the images, or only to, or if I want to add to only one, I need enable to identify them individually. So we have that, and this is the attribute called ID. So every tag in HTML, including the body and the head, so and even the HTML, any tag can have the attribute ID. And this attribute ID is a string that you give yourself as a unique identifier. So I can say, for example, this is my middle cat image, right? I'm making up this name. But what's cool about this is now I can use this string in my JavaScript. I can say here, document is an object, which is the DOM. So I'm gonna write a comment here, document is the DOM. I can say document, there's a special function here called get element by ID. And now I give this ID here. And let me now define a variable to store the result of that function. So I'll say let is a way of defining variables in JavaScript. You can use this. There's another one called var. And you can also not use any of these whatsoever. So you can say, for example, let's say this is my middle image. equals to this. So now middle image is a variable that's going to store the result of this function. I'm going to keep the keyword let here, and I'm going to discuss this a little bit later. What is the difference between let, var, and not using these two at all? But this is how you declare a variable. You could have, for example, let I equals 0, right? This is a simple definition of an integer. Notice that in JavaScript, we don't specify the type of the variables. The types are dynamic. They're assigned when you assign or when you create a variable and assign a value to it, then a type is also automatically assigned. But let me print you this. Sorry, let me print you the value of this variable. Let's see what happens. See, when I print this, I actually, if I hover my mouse on top of that, my browser even like highlights the image there. So now I'm 100% sure that that variable stores the node of the DOM that I want. So remember, the DOM is a tree-like structure. Basically, what I have here, this image tag is a children in that tree, but this is also HTML. So this is a tag. We basically retrieved the tag in the tree. So now we can say something like, we can type this, we can do this, middle image. We can say on click. And now this is how you do event-based programming. We are saying that on click, I'm going to run a function. And you can say that you can assign a function to an attribute. And now this attribute automatically becomes a function. So this is I think this is very nice in JavaScript, that you can easily assign functions to attributes, and automatically they become executable. So here I can say console.log click or clicked. What I expect from this is whenever and again, on click is a special attribute of any tag, that if you actually implement this attribute, you are now handling that click event yourself. So now you should be able to do whatever you want when the user clicks on the image, basically. So let's see what happens. So if I click in the middle cat, I get clicked every time I click on it. But if I click on the other ones, I don't get the behavior. Okay. There is many events that you can listen and handle in JavaScript. For example, mouse up, mouse down, key up, key down, mouse move. If you are on a touch environment like the phone, the browsers there also have like swipe and all these touch events. So I won't spend time going over all of these, but just keep in mind that next time you're doing the UI or building your web page, you can take advantage of all these events. Okay, and just again refer to the documentation to learn how to implement those events. But just quick recap, this idea of IDs are very important, because we're going to use this in many different times actually in this course. Speaking of IDs, I want to just quickly comment that you can use the IDs also in your CSS. If you want, for example, here, this rule is very broad because it's applied to every single image. But if I want to, for example, if I want to specialize, let's say if I want to make the middle image like a bit wider, right? I could say here point no hashtag um, what is the ID? We can take the ID here, middle cat image, and then we can say width 200. So now this thing is going to override this general rule. See, we can use the IDs as a way to apply rules for individual elements in JavaScript or in CSS too. Another attribute that is important in HTML that is similar to ID is the attribute class. So now if I want, for example, if I want to create a class, basically a class is an ID for more than one object. So for example, if I create a class called cat image, I can say this, for example, I can say cat image here, cat image here. Also, I can give the same class to this guy. And I can retrieve elements by class, same way. But in the CSS, I can have this notation here with point cat image, and then you can say, let's say width 300 pixels. Actually, let's make this, yeah, let's make this 50 pixels. See, now we see the left and the right images like with 50 pixels wide because we are using this rule as a class rule. But basically, you have IDs and classes, and they act in a similar way, but IDs for one single object and classes are for multiple objects. And this can be very useful. For example, in this case, now I could even get rid of this rule because now I have this rule for the middle class and this class rule for these two other elements. So that one is almost like it's not even being used because we have all these other two rules. Obviously, if you have another image that is not part of the, for example, if I have another image here that's not in the class, then I would probably need that rule. Otherwise, now I'm using this rule here because this image here, the fourth image that I just added, is not, it's nor this or is not, yeah, or the class. Anyways, you can combine these and use these ideas as much as you want and for your own need. And this requires your, this can be used as you wish. Of course, there are good standards for writing these things. But as you get experience with CSS and JavaScript and HTML, you're gonna like actually get used to organize these things in a meaningful way. Okay. Okay. Any questions about this ID, class, or handling events, or JavaScript so far? Okay. Okay. Cool. So let's move forward. So now that we talked about JavaScript, I just want to go and add JavaScript to the kind of this mix when you're rendering a page. So the browser also parses the JavaScript file using this JS engine or JavaScript engine. And the JavaScript engine has access to both the DOM and the CSOM. So you can access any CSS information or HTML information through JavaScript. And that's important to keep in mind. we saw an example. We saw a couple of examples with the ID, how you retrieved one node from the DOM using JavaScript, right? You just saw that. I just want to give you this kind of diagram so you have a mental model of how these things are working together.